Perhaps you know your daughter is high-spirited and high-strung, and you know that may get her in trouble, but you don't want to quash that spirit, and you don't think you ought to anyway. On the other hand, you don't want that independent, high-spirited young woman to get in trouble, and you've got to figure out how to work her through that without running your thumb over her and killing the spirit and driving her into the ground. It's easy to say yes, but sometimes you have to say no. If you're going to mold that character, if you're going to be a leader, and believe me, this is a leadership job most of us aren't very well prepared for. Most people I know struggle with it, but it's a prime example of leadership. Now, as I've indicated, you cannot lead unless you understand yourself. You can't jump into public leadership, to leading out there, or effective leadership without some personal maturity and strength of character to deal with others. Again, as Stephen Covey puts it, and I quote, "You can't be successful with other people if you haven't paid the price of success with yourself." So armed with the understanding of who you are and your character and what you want to achieve and what you want to do, then you can turn out there to what you want to lead. And that gets us to another fundamental principle. If you're going to be a leader, you have to understand the people you're trying to lead. Again, as Stephen Covey put it, first understand, then be understood. You have to get into another person's frame of reference if you're going to be a leader. This is a story, another story that I can use for lots of things. But I think it's a great story that illustrates you have to know what's going on with the people you're trying to lead. And it's like I said at the beginning, nothing I've got to say is original. It all came from someplace else. But man's on a subway in New York, up high in the 80s or the 90s on a Sunday morning, and there aren't very many people on the subway. Maybe it's a third full, and it's pretty quiet. It's Sunday morning. I think it's 9 or 10 o'clock, and people are riding along, and everybody's tired on Sunday. It's not like the hustle and bustle of the subway in the middle of the week. It's pretty quiet. Some people reading newspapers and doing other things, and most people not wanting to deal with anything. It's Sunday. It's just kind of relaxed. And all of a sudden, a guy gets on with 5 kids, and they're all under 10, and they all sit down, and instantly they're up. And they're all over the subway car. And they're running up and down and hollering and yelling, and everybody that's on the subway just, they just don't want to deal with it. And the kids are even knocking people's newspapers down, and they're doing what kids do. And finally one guy thinks, I'm not going to let that father get away with that. I'm going to tell him. He's got to get his kids under control. So he goes back to where the father is sitting quietly, the father's kind of observing it. And he says to the guys, he sits down, your kids are totally unruly, and this place is chaos with them. The father says, yeah, I know that. And he says, I don't really know what to do about it. We just left the hospital and their mother died. Now that's a perfect example of, unless you know what's going on with the people you're trying to lead, you can't very well do it. That changed the whole frame of reference right there. People take everybody takes a different approach. But it is a perfect example. You have to get into another person's frame of reference if you're going to lead them. You have to know what the person or group you're trying to lead desires or thinks or believes. You need to understand them and their needs, and then you can begin to lead them where you're trying to go. If you understand what people want and why they want it, then you can figure out whether you can offer it to them, whether you can lead them or where you want to go. If there are problems with their assumptions, or if they don't really understand why they want it, you can begin to discuss that with them. But if you simply start with your own agenda that you want to sell, you're not going anyplace. You're not going anyplace because you don't understand where they're coming from. First understand, then be understood. And it's not just because you want to be sure what the crowd wants. There's an old idea that floats around that there are some leaders that figure out where the body politic or whatever is going, and then they run around and get in front of them. That's not my point. That's not what I'm talking about. My point is that when you start with your own agenda, what it is you want to accomplish as you lead, or before you lead, you have to understand the people you're dealing with and trying to lead and what their motivations and desires are, or you'll never do a very good job. One of the most difficult problems I faced in my law firm as managing partner was taking in new partners. From time to time, in order to grow a law partnership, make it an ongoing entity and an institution, and the one I'm with is an institution and it's been around for 120 years, the partnership has to take in younger people and has to make them partners. The problem is, or was for me, that if you have 30 or 40 partners, they're all going to vote on who comes into the partnership. And if you've got 30 or 40 people voting, they probably have got 20 different ideas on what the characteristics ought to be of a potential partner. Partnership to lawyers, at least in this town, in this area, it's a mystical process. I mean, it's a lifetime bond, and it doesn't always work that way, but an awful lot of people, they hire on for life and they become partners for life. And taking in new people is a tough job. It's a very complex issue. Some people think that whoever you take in as a partner ought to be like them. Some people think they ought to have different skills, different talents. Some people are afraid of the future because they look at somebody and say, how are those people going to fit in 20 years from now? Some people are worried about the values of an incoming partner in the long term and how those values will fit. But every current partner gets a vote. In our case, we had to have an 80% vote. Now, if you think it's easy to get 80% of a group of lawyers to agree on anything, you don't understand. That's tough, and that's a major leadership job. If you're the leader of the law firm, and if the goal is that for the ongoing viability of the partnership, you have to take in 1 or 2 or 5 partners, if that's a goal you're committed to, and you think it ought to happen for the benefit of the law firm, then somehow you have to synthesize all of those different concepts, and then you have to turn to the people that are the candidates that might be the partners, and you have to make them fit together so that you come up with your 80% vote. That's a perfect example of how a leader can't just have a program that he or she wants to convince people to adopt. There's no way you can do that if you don't understand the voters, the partners, and what they wanted. And only after the leader understands what the rest of the partners want can he or she then begin to focus on the individual candidates and determine whether or not they have the qualities that the leader thinks the partnership needs and that you can fit together with them, and whether you can convince the rest of the partners to take them in.